She walked into the classroom alone, the only black girl in a sea of silence. They whispered, they stared, and one of them tried to drag her out like she didn't belong. But what happened next? It didn't just shock the school, it changed it. Forever. This is the story of Zuri Bennett, a girl who didn't flinch, didn't fold, and didn't ask for permission to take up space. A girl who turned a classroom into a battlefield for truth, and won. But this isn't just about one girl flipping a bully. It's about reclaiming identity, rewriting power, and building a space for voices that were never meant to be quiet. Stay with us. What you're about to witness isn't just a story, it's a movement. The rain had just stopped when Zuri Bennett stepped through the glass doors of Northgate Academy. Her sneakers, still damp from the sidewalk puddles of Eastlake, made soft squeaks on the polished floors of the elite school. She paused for a second at the front lobby, her eyes drifting upward to the banners of academic excellence and student council campaigns that lined the hall like medals in a museum she wasn't invited to. This wasn't her world. Not yet. But she adjusted the strap of her backpack, lifted her chin, and walked in. Not like a guest, but like someone who'd already paid the price of entry. Fourth period was math. Room 3B. The hallways were quieter than expected, with whispers trailing behind her like invisible thorns brushing her back. She heard them but didn't react. They said things like, new girl, Eastlake, and occasionally, in a hushed, sharper tone, black girl. She kept her pace steady, not slow, not fast. Steady, like a storm that doesn't need to announce itself to be feared. When she pushed open the door to 3B, the classroom froze, the air taut like the breath before a lightning strike. 23 students, 23 pairs of eyes, one new presence they didn't ask for. Mrs. Whitley, a woman with graying curls and soft cardigans, looked up from the whiteboard, marker mid-air, and forced a smile. Class, please welcome our new student, Zuri Bennett, she said, almost as if she hoped no one would respond. No one did. Zuri didn't wave, she didn't nod. She walked past the front row, where the high performers sat with sharpened pencils, past the middle, where the indifferent lounged half asleep, and took her place in the back corner, near the window, far from everyone else, and yet where everyone could still see her. Her seat was cold, her breath calm. She opened her notebook, wrote the date, and waited. 3 seats ahead sat Colton Reeves. He didn't turn right away, but when he did, it was with a slow, deliberate shift of his head, like a lion catching scent. His jaw tightened. His knuckles went white around his pencil. Colton wasn't just another student. He was a name. He was the reason 3 kids had transferred last semester. Broad-shouldered, blue-eyed, and always on the edge of something. Suspension, a fight, or worse. He had history. And when he looked at Zuri, it wasn't curiosity. It was warning. A storm recognized another. Mrs. Whitley resumed her lesson, talking about fractions and least common multiples, her voice a fragile thread in the tense silence. Can anyone solve this one? She asked, pointing to the board. No one responded. Not because they didn't know the answer, but because they all felt it. Something was about to break. Colton's pencil cracked in 2. The sound, though small, was a cannon in the quiet. Mason, his best friend, leaned in. Dude, chill. But Colton didn't chill. He stood. His chair screeched against the floor like claws across a chalkboard. Every head turned. Zuri didn't. She just kept writing. Hey! Colton's voice shot like a bullet across the room. You don't belong here! The words were meant to cut. Not just insult, to define, to isolate. Mrs. Whitley turned sharply. Colton, sit down. But he stepped forward. I said, he growled, louder this time, you don't belong in this class. The class stopped breathing. Zuri looked up, her eyes meeting his. Calm, direct. Sit down, Colton, she said, not as a request, but as a line drawn in stone. Colton's laugh was jagged. Oh, you think you're tough? He started walking toward her. Mrs. Whitley tried to step in, but he brushed her aside like static. His boots thundered closer. Every heartbeat in the room synced to his footsteps. Zuri stayed still. When he reached her desk, he glared down. What's your problem, huh? You think you're better than us? She didn't flinch. He kicked her desk. Her pen rolled off the surface and hit the floor with a quiet clink. Say something, Eastlake, he hissed, using her neighborhood like a slur. Gasps whispered through the rows. One girl covered her mouth. Even Mason whispered, Dude, you're going too far. But Colton leaned closer. You're not smart, you're not welcome. And you sure as hell don't belong in my classroom. Then he grabbed her wrist, tight. You're leaving, now. Zuri's chair scraped back as he pulled. The room waited. Time paused. Colton raised his fist. That was the last mistake he'd make today. Zuri moved. Quick. Clean. With a pivot she had practiced 1,000 times on the worn mats of her father's boxing gym, she ducked under his swing, grabbed his wrist, twisted, stepped behind him, and flipped him. Hard. His body hit the ground like thunder against earth. Silence swallowed the room. For a breathless second, no one spoke. No one even moved. Then Zuri stood tall, the kind of stillness that doesn't ask for power. It owns it. She picked up her chair, sat back down, crossed her legs, opened her notebook, and kept writing, like it was just another day. Like she hadn't just changed everything. In the stunned hush, someone finally whispered, "What just happened?" And no one could answer. Yet Dot. For a moment, no one knew what to do. Not even Colton, who lay sprawled across the floor, breath knocked clean out of him, face twisted between fury and disbelief. Mason's mouth hung open, eyes darting between his friend and the girl who had just flipped him like she'd been born to it. The sound that broke the silence wasn't a scream or a cry. It was a single clap. Then another. And then, like a wave cresting, the entire class erupted in stunned, chaotic applause. Some stood. Others laughed out of sheer shock. One girl whispered, "Holy crap, she's a ninja," while a boy in the front row pumped his fist in the air. Mrs. Whitley, whose hand had been hovering near the intercom button, finally pressed it. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I need security in room 3B now." Zuri didn't move. Her pen scratched across the paper, as if she were solving an equation, not sitting in the epicenter of a social earthquake. When two security officers arrived moments later, Officer Jamal and Officer Reeves, both in uniform but wearing different expressions, Colton was still groaning on the floor like a wounded animal that couldn't decide whether to cry or attack. "What the hell happened here?" Officer Jamal demanded, his eyes scanning the room. "She attacked me!" Colton yelled, trying to scramble to his feet, his voice hoarse with rage. "She jumped me! Everyone saw!" But it was Mrs. Whitley who spoke first. Her voice was suddenly firm, crisp. "No, Colton! You attacked her! Everyone saw it, and I've already sent the class footage to the office server." Colton's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Mason backed away slowly like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The two officers exchanged a glance. Officer Jamal nodded, stepping forward and grabbing Colton by the arm. "Let's go!" "Let go of me!" Colton shouted, struggling, red-faced and sweaty. "She's the problem. She's not like us." But no one echoed him this time. No murmurs of agreement, not even Mason. The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't filled with fear or discomfort. It was thick with realization. Something had just shifted, and nothing would go back to how it was. As the classroom door closed behind the struggling Colton, Zuri still didn't look up. But everyone looked at her differently now. Not like a stranger. Not like a target. Like someone they couldn't quite define, but someone who had just rewritten the rules. When the bell rang 15 minutes later, no one rushed to leave. They moved slowly, carefully, as if brushing up against a force they hadn't expected to find in a classroom. As Zuri walked through the hall toward her locker, she noticed it. Not the stares, those had always been there, but the nods. Small, subtle, acknowledgments, not of pity, not of apology, but of respect. At the end of the hall, one of the guidance counselors tapped her shoulder gently. "Principal Hayes wants to see you," she said with the tone adults used when they weren't sure whether something was praise or punishment. Zuri followed her down the stairs, through the admin wing, and into the wood-paneled office with gold lettering that read, "Principal Ernest Hayes." The man behind the desk was tall, mid-50s, with a gray beard trimmed with military precision, and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He motioned for her to sit. "You okay?" he asked, his voice neither soft nor sharp, just assessing. "I'm fine," Zuri replied, folding her hands in her lap. "Colton's parents will be coming in. There'll be a disciplinary hearing. We're reviewing camera footage, but—" He paused, looked her dead in the eye. Everyone in that room saw exactly what happened. Zuri nodded once. "I didn't start it." "I know," he said, then leaned forward slightly, elbows on the desk. "But I've got to ask, where'd you learn to do that?" A corner of her lip lifted, not quite a smile. "My dad," she said simply. "He owns a boxing gym in Eastlake. He taught me to stay low and use my weight, not just on the mat. Principal Hayes raised both eyebrows, the first hint of surprise breaking through his composed exterior. That explains it. They sat for a moment in quiet, the weight of what happened still hovering in the room like mist after a storm. "You're not in trouble," he added, almost as an afterthought, "but keep your head down. Things like this can go viral, and not everyone's going to tell the story right." "I know," Zuri replied. She stood up. "Thank you, sir." He nodded. "You're dismissed." As she walked out of his office, a subtle shift had already begun rippling through the school. The whispers now carried a different tone, one that tasted of awe more than judgment. Kids looked up from their phones, screens lit up with clips and blurry freeze frames. The news was out. Something had happened in room 3B, and Zuri Bennett's name was no longer unknown. It was legend. That night, she sat at the dinner table with her dad, scooping beans onto her plate while he scrolled silently through his phone. The glow lit up his weathered face until he stopped scrolling, looked at her, and grunted. "You flipped him?" She paused mid-bite. "I didn't want to." "But you did," he said. "And you didn't back down." "No, sir." He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once. That was all he said. That was all he needed to say. Because respect, real respect, didn't need to be loud. It just had to be true that the next morning, when Zuri stepped off the city bus and walked up the steps to Northgate Academy, the air felt different. Not warmer, not safer, just sharper. Like the school itself was holding its breath. Her footsteps echoed through the hall, and this time, though students still turned to look, their eyes didn't carry the same weight. They weren't sizing her up or whispering behind her back. There was something else in their gaze now. Curiosity, maybe. Caution, definitely. A few kids gave her a slight nod, a tight smile, the kind you give someone you don't quite understand, but wouldn't dare underestimate. She didn't return them, not out of pride, but because she knew better than to read too much into sudden respect born from spectacle. The only thing she wanted was quiet. Math class, again. Room 3B. She entered just as the bell rang. Mrs. Whitley gave her a quick glance and a subtle nod of acknowledgement. Barely a smile, but more than yesterday. Zuri took her usual seat in the back, by the window. Same desk, same angle. This time, her pen was already uncapped before the class settled in. The energy in the room was different. No Colton, no threats. But the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a vacuum, waiting to be filled. And then the door opened. The classroom didn't flinch. Not at first. But Zuri noticed. She always noticed first. Boots, black, with silver buckles. A slow stride that didn't hesitate. A leather jacket, tight and shiny. Hoops, dark lipstick. Eyes like static. The new girl walked in with a presence that swallowed the doorway whole. Her name, as Mrs. Whitley announced hesitantly, was Riley Reeves. Zuri's breath caught. Not because she was surprised, but because she had known. The last name, the way she walked, the silence around her. Reeves, Colton's sister. Of course, Riley didn't say a word. She scanned the room like a general walking through enemy territory, ignored the empty seats, and sat one desk over from Zuri. Close enough to make a point. Close enough to be felt. She didn't take out a notebook. She didn't glance at the teacher. She just sat, arms crossed, eyes forward. Zuri didn't look at her, didn't give her the power of recognition. But she could feel Riley's stare like cold steel pressed to her neck. Mrs. Whitley resumed teaching as if nothing had shifted, but the tension in the room was alive, slithering under desks, wrapping around ankles, coiling tighter with each second. Halfway through the lesson, as Mrs. Whitley turned to the board, Riley leaned in, her whisper so low it barely touched the air. "You think you're safe now?" Zuri kept her eyes on the board. "You're not," Riley continued. "You made my brother look weak. My family doesn't forget that." The words weren't loud. They weren't even angry. But they were dangerous. Zuri's grip tightened on her pen, but she didn't respond. She'd learned long ago that some threats weren't meant to be answered. They were meant to be watched. That day, Riley followed her from class to class, never walking beside her, always near enough to be noticed. At lunch, she sat 2 tables away, flanked by 2 girls dressed in all black, silent as shadows. Whispers bloomed across the cafeteria like mold. That's her. Colton's sister. "She's here for Zuri." Zuri ate in silence, head low, every movement deliberate, like she was being filmed. Because she was. She could feel it. That evening, as she walked past a group of lockers, someone slid a phone screen in front of her face. "Yo, you seen this?" a boy asked. The screen played a video clip, blurry, pixelated, but unmistakable. The footage showed Colton lunging, Zuri flipping him, but it had been edited. The beginning was cut, and the captions painted her as the aggressor. "Look how she attacked him," the caption read. Zuri watched her own body move, her own breath caught in a lie. And standing just a few lockers away, Riley watched her with a faint smile curling her lips. Zuri didn't say a word. She didn't ask who posted it. She didn't need to. She just turned and walked straight to the office, heart pounding not from fear, but from fury. Cold, calculating fury. When she stepped into Principal Hayes' office, he looked up from his desk, brows raised. "Another incident?" he asked. "No," she said. "A request. I want a meeting, a real one, full school, cameras." He blinked. "You sure?" "Very," she said. "And make sure they see the full truth this time." Hayes nodded slowly. "I'll arrange it." She left his office with a stillness in her step that no one dared interrupt. That night, she sat with her father again, this time neither of them speaking. He was cleaning gloves in the kitchen, the scent of leather mixing with the simmering stew on the stove. After a while he spoke. "People fight with fists," he said, "but cowards fight with cameras." She nodded. "So what do I do?" He looked up. "You fight smarter. Make 'em show the whole tape. Make 'em choke on their own lie." She breathed in deeply and nodded again. And when she went to bed, she wasn't scared. She was ready. The announcement came over the intercom just after second period ended, crisp and formal, but heavy with unspoken weight. "All students and faculty, please report to the auditorium for a mandatory school-wide assembly." The halls, usually buzzing with chatter and slamming lockers, fell into an uneasy quiet. Zuri walked with measured steps through the corridors of Northgate Academy, surrounded by bodies but alone in thought. She could feel the air change around her as she passed. Heads turning, conversations dying mid-sentence, phones being tucked away quickly, as if hiding their guilt. But she didn't flinch. She didn't ask who edited the video or how many people believed it. None of that mattered now. Truth didn't need backup. It needed a stage, and today she was ready to step on it. Inside the auditorium, rows of students filled the velvet seats, their whispers swirling like dust in light beams from the high windows. Teachers lined the walls, hands folded, eyes already suspicious. Principal Hayes stood at the podium center stage, flanked by the assistant principal and the district coordinator, both looking like they wished they were anywhere else. But Hayes looked steady, as if he knew exactly what he was about to do and dared anyone to interrupt him. Zuri took her seat near the middle, back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. 3 rows over, Riley Reeves sat with her arms crossed, expression unreadable, but her eyes burned with anticipation. Principal Hayes tapped the microphone. "Good morning," he said. "I won't waste your time. There's been a lot of talk this week about an incident in room 3B. A low rumble stirred in the crowd. Some of that talk has been honest, some of it hasn't. So we're going to clear the air today, with facts." The lights dimmed, the large screen behind him flickered to life, and the video began. Not the edited version, the real one. It started from the beginning, Colton yelling, rising from his seat, his voice poisonous and loud. The camera caught everything. The racial slurs, the threats, the moment he grabbed Zuri's wrist. The whole auditorium stiffened. Even students who thought they knew the story shifted in their seats, shocked by how much they hadn't seen or had refused to see. And then came the flip. The flawless, powerful, fluid takedown that left Colton breathless on the ground. And Zuri, calm, composed, not triumphant, but steady. When the video ended, silence hung like a held breath. And then applause. Not hesitant this time. Loud, firm, rising in waves from one side of the room to the other. Principal Hayes let it build before raising his hand for silence. "That's the truth," he said. "Not because someone said so, but because we saw it. This school doesn't tolerate violence, and it certainly doesn't tolerate lies." He paused. "And to whoever manipulated that footage, know this. We're investigating. We already have names. We're not done yet." At that moment, Riley's jaw clenched so tightly her earrings trembled. She didn't clap. She didn't move. But her face, pale with fury, said everything. After the assembly, students flooded the halls with a strange energy, half exhilaration, half guilt. Some looked at Zuri, and nodded with something that resembled apology. Others kept their heads down, ashamed they'd shared the fake video without questioning it. But Zuri, she walked the hallway like she always did, silent, steady, unshaken. Until she reached her locker. Riley was there first, flanked by her two shadows in black, waiting. Zuri approached, undeterred. "You think you're smart?" Riley hissed. "You think making my brother look weak and turning this school into your pity parade makes you special?" Zuri met her gaze, slow and unblinking. "I didn't make your brother look weak. He did that all by himself." Oh, Riley stepped in, just inches from her face, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You don't belong here. You're a charity case from Eastlake, pretending to be something you're not." Zuri opened her locker calmly. "You know what I am," she said softly. "Still here." Riley's face darkened. She raised her hand, fast and sharp, as if to slap her. The hallway gasped. Time froze. And then a strong hand gripped Riley's wrist midair. It was Officer Jamal. His face was stone. "That's enough," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Riley tried to yank her arm back. "She started it." "No," Jamal interrupted, shaking his head. "We've reviewed the hallway cameras. We know you've been following her. We know about the video, and we know who leaked it." The hallway went deathly quiet. Principal Hayes appeared from around the corner, holding a printed sheet. "Riley Reeves," he said firmly, "you're suspended for harassment and slander. Your parents have been contacted." When Riley's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she looked small. The two girls behind her took a cautious step back. As Officer Jamal escorted her away, the crowd didn't jeer. They didn't laugh. They simply watched. Because justice, when it finally lands, doesn't always need noise. Sometimes it only needs silence that tastes like balance. Zuri turned back to her locker, exchanged her books, and walked to class. No celebration. No performance. Just a girl who refused to disappear. Friday morning. Sunlight filtered through the trees lining Northgate Academy's campus, casting long slashes of gold across the pavement. But Zuri Bennett didn't notice the beauty in it. Not today. Her steps were quiet but grounded, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her earbuds in but playing nothing. She didn't need sound. She needed clarity. The halls were more still than usual, students moving with the kind of measured awareness that follows a storm. News of Riley's suspension had traveled fast. By lunch yesterday, screenshots of Principal Hayes' disciplinary note had leaked online, and by dinner, parents and PTA groups were discussing the incident in private Facebook threads. Zuri didn't care about any of that. She only cared about the letter taped to her locker. It had appeared that same afternoon, simple and unassuming. A folded sheet of notebook paper, carefully taped dead center. At first, she thought it was another threat, another jab in disguise. But when she peeled it off and opened it, her fingers froze. The handwriting was neat, block letters, no name at the bottom. Just a message. "Thank you for standing up for all of us. Half the class." Her chest tightened. Not because it flattered her, but because it confirmed something deeper, that in being brave for herself, she had unknowingly become a shield for others too. That knowledge lingered as she sat down in her usual back corner seat in room 3B Mrs. Whitley gave her a longer glance than usual, one that carried weight, respect, and perhaps regret. Maybe for not stepping in fast enough. Maybe for not seeing sooner. But Zuri didn't need apologies. She needed consistency. And today, the room felt, steady. No stares, no mutters. Just pencils scratching paper and the low hum of a normal day. That was more powerful than any cheer. During break, Mason, the same Mason who once laughed at Colton's jokes, walked up to her in the courtyard. He didn't smile, didn't stammer, just handed her a wrapped protein bar and said, "My bad," then walked off before she could respond. She held the bar in her hand for a second longer than needed, then placed it in her bag without a word. She wasn't looking for reconciliation, but quiet gestures done right meant more than public praise. In third period, a girl from the honors track, or blonde, always top of the class, asked Zuri if she wanted to partner up for the chemistry project, not out of pity, but as equals. Zuri agreed. That, more than anything, felt like progress. After school, as she passed the office on her way to the bus stop, Principal Hayes stepped out with a nod. "Good week," he said. Zuri shrugged. "It was a week." He smiled faintly, then added, "Board's watching the case. Just so you know, we're tightening video access protocols. Nobody will be editing the truth on our watch again. She met his eyes. Thanks. No, he replied. Thank you. That night she walked home under a quiet sky, the clouds heavy with something unsaid. Her father was in the gym, taping his fists, sweat glistening on his brow under the single fluorescent light. She stood at the door, watching him punch the bag in rhythm. 1, 2, duck, 3. When he noticed her, he stopped. How's school? He asked, grabbing a towel. Calmer, she said. For now. He nodded. That's the thing about storms. They pass. But they don't forget where they've been. She sat on the bench near the wall, pulling her knees to her chest. I didn't want any of this attention. You didn't get attention, he replied. You earned presents. She looked at him. What if it happens again? Then you don't flinch, he said, sitting beside her. You've already proved something most people never will, that you're not afraid to stand alone, even when they try to erase you. She rested her head on his shoulder, just for a moment, letting the silence stretch. She didn't say it aloud, but she felt it. That for once, she wasn't carrying the weight of that fight alone, and that made all the difference. The next day, when she walked back into school, something small but profound had changed. Not the system, not the policies, but the way students moved around her. They didn't avoid her. They didn't surround her. They simply adjusted, like the space around her now acknowledged she existed and always had the right to. In the cafeteria, her seat at the end of the table was no longer isolated. A freshman boy quietly slid his tray one seat over. A junior in a hijab gave her a quiet thumbs up from across the room. No fanfare, no noise, just recognition. And that was the loudest victory of all. After lunch, as she walked past the art wing toward the courtyard, a younger girl, a quiet one, always sketching alone, approached her, holding something wrapped in a protective folder. I drew this, the girl said, shy eyes darting away. Of you. Zuri hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a charcoal sketch, powerful, raw, and real, her, in mid-motion, the moment she flipped Colton. But her expression wasn't angry. It was calm, composed, like she'd been doing this her whole life. Zuri looked at the girl, who murmured, I've never drawn someone like me before. Zuri smiled, her real smile, the one she rarely used, and whispered, Keep drawing. As the bell rang, she tucked the sketch inside her folder and returned to class. Not because she had to, but because she belonged there. Not because they said so, but because she knew it now for herself. Monday arrived with gray skies and the taste of rain in the air. And though Zuri Bennett had learned not to expect peace, she allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe things were finally settling. She walked into Northgate Academy wearing her father's old bomber jacket, a little too big on her shoulders, but it made her feel protected, like she carried a legacy that couldn't be bruised. Students passed her without whispers this time, and while the stares hadn't completely vanished, they no longer felt like daggers, more like glances of reluctant admiration or thoughtful curiosity. In the classroom, Mrs. Whitley had written a quote on the board, When you stand for something, you risk standing alone. Zuri caught the teacher's eye for just a second, and in that glance was something unspoken, understanding, maybe even apology. She took her usual seat at the back, pulled out her notebook, and settled into the rhythm of the day. It wasn't normal, not yet, but it was close. Between second and third period, the hallways felt oddly hushed, until a voice rose from near the lockers by the gym entrance, loud enough to ripple through the air. So that's her, someone said. Zuri didn't turn her head. She didn't need to. But she heard the edge in the tone, and she could feel the tension creeping back in like a draft under a locked door. A girl she didn't recognize walked past, then another, both with the same stiff posture, the same hesitant expression. And then came the twist. Someone new had arrived, a transfer student from out of state, they said. No one knew her well, but her name was already passing between students like wildfire, Kendra Vaughn. Tall, with dark skin like polished mahogany and braids down to her waist, Kendra walked with a kind of boldness that demanded either admiration or resistance, depending on who was watching, and everyone was watching. Zuri first saw her at the vending machine. Their eyes met for half a second. No nod, no smile, just a shared silence that somehow meant more than any words. But then the rumors started, that Kendra had come from a school where she'd been expelled for fighting, that she didn't take orders, that she was the next Zuri, and worse, that she wanted to replace her. Zuri heard them all, and she ignored them all. because that's how it always worked. The world didn't know how to hold more than one strong black girl at a time without making them opponents. It didn't know how to let them stand beside each other without drawing a battle line. So, when Kendra entered 3B and sat, of all places, 2 seats from Zuri, the classroom rippled with tension, like a dropped pebble in a still lake. Mrs. Whitley paused for a moment, then kept teaching, but the energy in the room had shifted. Zuri kept her eyes on her notes, but she could feel the pressure building, the weight of other people's expectations pressing down on both of them. At lunch, Zuri sat alone again, not because no one would sit with her, but because she needed to think. Kendra entered the cafeteria 5 minutes later and walked straight to her, past the whispers, past the rumors, and sat across from her like it was the most normal thing in the world. For a second, neither of them spoke. Zuri raised an eyebrow. Kendra shrugged. Figured we should talk before they turn this into a cage match. Zuri smirked despite herself. Too late. Kendra leaned forward. I'm not here to fight you. I know what they're trying to do. Turn us into enemies. Make us compete for a spotlight none of us asked for. Zuri stared at her. So why sit here? Because I don't want the spotlight. I want the space, Kendra said. And I figured if anyone understood that, it'd be you. Zuri nodded slowly. There was no need for deeper explanations. They both got it. They were 2 sides of the same story being spun by outsiders who didn't know what it meant to just want to exist without performing. Just then, a voice piped up from a few tables over, mocking, sarcastic. Look at them! Power lunch for the drama queens. Kendra turned her head, cool and measured. You say something? The boy faltered. Nah, just joking. Then joke better, she replied, her voice steady as steel. The cafeteria didn't burst into cheers. It didn't need to. But a ripple of silence followed, and in that silence, something shifted again. After lunch, Zuri and Kendra walked side by side toward the courtyard. Not as best friends, not as rivals, as allies. And in a school that had only known how to pit them against each other, that simple act, walking together, was the boldest rebellion yet. That night, Zuri sat on her bed, replaying the day, the way the narrative tried to twist again, to bend her into a shape she didn't fit. But this time, she wasn't alone. She picked up her phone, typed a message, paused, then deleted it. Instead, she opened her notes app and began to write. Not a story about pain or confrontation or resistance, but about space, about carving out a place in a world that tries to shrink you, about what happens when 2 girls refuse to be boxed in. And as the rain finally began to fall outside, steady and soft, she wrote with a calm she hadn't felt in weeks, not because the storm was over, but because she was learning to dance inside it. The next morning brought a peculiar stillness to Northgate Academy, like the school itself was holding its breath again, waiting to see whether the balance Zuri and Kendra had created would hold or collapse. Zuri arrived early, her bomber jacket zipped up to her chin, eyes scanning the courtyard with the practiced caution of someone who knew that peace never lasted without a fight. She passed groups of students whispering not with ridicule this time, but with uncertainty. No one knew what to expect anymore, and that made people nervous. Zuri didn't mind. Let them be nervous. She walked through the double doors just as the bell rang, and there was Kendra Vaughn, already at her locker, head held high, earbuds in, unbothered. They exchanged a glance, not a smile or a nod, just acknowledgement, like 2 captains on the same battlefield. But peace, however quiet, always had its saboteurs. Halfway through second period, a new post appeared on Northgate's anonymous student forum. It was a photo, low quality but unmistakable. Kendra standing in front of Zuri's locker, captioned, 2 queens, please. We all know there's only 1 seat on the throne. The comments were instant, brutal, and pointed. Zuri's the OG. Kendra's just copying her. Kendra's gonna start drama soon. Just watch. Let's see them in a real fight. By lunch, the post had over 400 reactions, and both girls knew about it. Zuri sat at the edge of the quad, her lunch untouched beside her, eyes staring out at nothing in particular. Kendra approached, sat beside her without asking, and sighed. So they want blood now, she said. Zuri didn't look at her. They always did. Now they just want to decide which one of us they can blame for spilling it. You mad? Kendra asked. At you? Zuri shook her head. No, at the game. At the way they watch us like we're not real until we're enemies. Kendra leaned back on her elbows, eyes on the clouds. They want to fight because that's easier to digest than two girls just existing. It's the only story they understand. So what do we do? Zuri asked, voice low. Write a better one, Kendra said. And just like that, the plan formed. Not out of rage, but out of clarity. The next day, the school held its monthly student showcase in the auditorium, a time for art, for poetry, for presentations that usually ended with polite claps and forgotten slideshows. But this time, Zuri and Kendra signed up together. Their submission? A spoken word piece titled Space for Two. No one knew what to expect, but the buzz was electric. Students packed the seats, even teachers leaned forward, curious. When the two girls walked onto the stage side by side, a murmur ran through the crowd. Zuri held the mic first, her voice even, strong. They say there can only be one voice, one story, one seat. Then Kendra took over, her cadence sharp and graceful. They say strength can't share a spotlight, that power only shines when it blinds. Back and forth they went, building momentum, their words slicing through the room with precision and beauty. But we are not copies, not shadows, not echoes of each other. We are whole, we are different, we are here, together. The final lines were spoken in unison, their voices echoing. We don't need one seat, we'll build our own table. The auditorium erupted. This time the applause wasn't shocked, it was earned. And it didn't just belong to one of them, it was shared. After the showcase, the forum lit up again, but the tone had changed. Screens filled with screenshots of the performance, captions like Unity Drama, and That's how you flip the narrative. Even the student council president reposted it with the comment, Leadership in motion. That afternoon, as Zuri returned to her locker, she noticed a folded note tucked into the side. Her first instinct was caution, but when she opened it, the words made her chest swell. You showed me I don't have to disappear to be safe. Thank you. Freshman in 2A. She folded it carefully and placed it inside her notebook, right next to the charcoal sketch the art girl had given her days ago. One more reminder that she wasn't just surviving, she was anchoring others. That evening, as she walked home under a sky streaked with lavender and dusk, her phone buzzed. A message from Kendra. Just 2 words. We started. Zuri smiled. Not because everything was fixed, not because the world had changed overnight, but because something had shifted. The story they were forced into no longer owned them. Now, they were writing it themselves. By Thursday. It was clear the tides had shifted, but shifts in power never go unnoticed, without resistance. For every nod of support Zuri and Kendra received, for every whispered, they killed it in the halls, there was a new undercurrent forming, a quieter kind of opposition, subtle, venomous, and harder to trace. Screenshots of their performance were now being mocked in private group chats with captions like, performative feminism much? And, pretty speeches don't make you real. Someone even created an anonymous poll titled, Who's the Real Queen of Northgate? And posted it on a student-run social account with over 1,000 followers. The options? Zuri, the OG, Kendra, the new wave, and neither, they both want attention. The most disturbing part wasn't the poll itself, but the fact that over 600 people voted within the first hour. Zuri stared at her screen in stunned silence, the numbers climbing like blood pressure. She had faced bullies, lies, and even physical threats, but this was different. This was systemic. This was the kind of insidious division that didn't shout. It whispered until it infected everything. She walked down the hall that morning with her head high, but the weight pressing behind her eyes wasn't rage, it was exhaustion. Kendra caught up with her outside the library. You see the poll? She asked, her voice flat. Yeah, Zuri replied. You? First thing I woke up to, Kendra said, shoving her phone back into her pocket. You ever get tired of fighting narratives you didn't write? Zuri gave a humorless smile. Every day. They sat together in the library at lunch, away from the noise, the screens, the stares, just the quiet hum of air conditioning and the smell of old pages. Kendra pulled out her notebook, flipped to a half-finished poem, then slammed it shut again. I don't know why this feels worse than everything else. Because this time, they're trying to make us tear each other down, Zuri said, and we know better. But even as she said it, she could feel the slow burn of insecurity tightening in her chest. What if Kendra resented her? What if people started choosing sides not because they believed in one of them, but because it made for better gossip? What if the world only allowed one of them to matter at a time? That afternoon, Principal Hayes called them both into his office. He didn't say much, just pushed a printed screenshot of the poll across the desk. "We're investigating who's behind this," he said, "but I need to ask, are either of you fueling this, even indirectly?" Zuri's heart stung at the implication, but she kept her voice calm. "No, sir." Kendra shook her head. "We didn't start this. We're just in it." Hayes nodded. "I believe you. But perception moves faster than truth. Be careful." After school, Zuri didn't take the bus. She walked. She needed the cold air, the ache in her feet, something physical to ground her. She passed the gym where her father trained kids for free every weekend. The doors were open, the thud of gloves on bags echoing inside like a heartbeat. She stood there for a while, just watching, remembering the lessons he taught without words. You don't flinch. You don't retreat. You pivot. Inside, her father noticed her, gave a nod, then continued working with a boy half her size, teaching him how to breathe through pressure. That night, Zuri sat on her bedroom floor, scrolling through her own memories. Screenshots, comments, performances, headlines. And then she did something she hadn't done since her first day at Northgate. She turned her phone off. Completely. She needed her voice back. Not the one filtered through digital noise, but the one buried underneath everyone else's opinion. The next morning, she showed up to school with no makeup, no earrings, no armor, just her. And somehow, that felt like the boldest move yet. Kendra met her at the front steps, holding 2 iced coffees. "You good?" she asked. Zuri took one, sipped slowly. "I will be." "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Kendra said. "Probably." They walked together toward the student media room, where the morning announcements were filmed. Normally, only student council members or valedictorians used the segment slot, but today, they were claiming it. The student producer looked at them with raised eyebrows. "You scheduled a segment?" "We are the segment," Kendra said. "You filming or not?" The red light on the camera blinked to life. Zuri stepped forward first. "This is for anyone watching who thinks choosing between us makes them more powerful." Kendra followed with a steady gaze. "This isn't about sides. This isn't a competition. This is about space for all of us." Zuri continued, voice steady. "We are not your fight to pick. We are not your drama to feed on. We are real people, and we're done playing roles you wrote without our consent." "So here's the deal," Kendra finished. "You don't get to shrink us down to labels and polls. We're not asking for your permission. We're taking up our space." The camera cut. Silence filled the room. And this time, it felt like they were finally being heard. Not because they were loud, but because they were clear. By the time the morning broadcast aired, the school was already buzzing, the hallways tingling with the energy of something too honest to be ignored. Students paused mid-conversation to watch the screen in the cafeteria. Teachers tilted their heads toward the hallway monitors during prep. Even the janitor, Mr. Ellis, who usually mopped through announcements without a glance, stopped with the mop halfway raised. Zuri and Kendra's words weren't poetry this time. They were declarations. And they landed like thunder in a school that had tried too long to smother storms with silence. By second period, the poll had been deleted. The anonymous account behind it, suspended. But the ripple was still moving. Not in rage, in reflection. In the way students moved out of the way for Zuri and Kendra, not out of fear or awe anymore, but out of something more human. Acknowledgement. Some even started speaking up online, posting comments like, "We're sorry we let it get this far," or, "They're not just symbols, they're students too." One post read simply, "Watching them speak reminded me my voice has value too." And maybe that was the real win. Not validation, not vindication, but ignition. Still, not everyone was clapping. After lunch, Zuri found a sheet of paper folded and tucked into the side of her locker. Her fingers hesitated. After weeks of threats, praise, rumors, and noise, she had learned to read weight by the texture of folded paper. This one wasn't hate. It wasn't love either. Inside were 5 names. No signature, no explanation, just Mia, Jordan, Lex, Z, Andre, and one line beneath, "We have something to say too." Zuri read it 3 times, then folded it again, carefully, precisely, and slipped it into the back of her notebook. That evening, she called Kendra. "We're not the only ones," she said. "We never were," Kendra replied, "but now they know they're allowed to speak." "What do we do?" Zuri asked. There was a pause on the line, then Kendra's voice softer than usual. We give them the mic. The next morning, they made a plan, not a performance, a platform. With Mrs. Whitley's help, they secured a free period next week for something they called Voices Unscripted, an open mic for students who had stories, frustrations, or truths they'd never had a safe space to share. No filters, no judgments, just presence. It wasn't flashy. There were no posters, no campaign, just a quiet whisper spreading through the halls. They're making space. By Friday, the sign-up sheet was full. In between classes, students who'd never spoken more than 3 words in front of a crowd wrote their names down in trembling pen strokes. One girl from the ESL class, a kid who stuttered, a non-binary sophomore who always ate lunch alone. Zuri and Kendra watched from a distance as the list grew. They didn't own the moment. They just lit the match. And on Monday, when the lights dimmed in the auditorium and the first student stepped up to the mic, voice shaking, hands in pockets, Zuri felt something deeper than victory. She felt belonging. Not just hers. Everyone's. The stories poured out like water through a cracked dam. Mia spoke about being biracial in a school that made her feel too white for one crowd, too black for another. Jordan talked about living with a single mom who worked 3 jobs and how shame wrapped around his throat like a collar every time someone said, "You don't look poor." Lex read a letter to their past self. Z broke into tears halfway through describing how they'd been laughed at for wearing natural hair. And Andre, he didn't say a word. He brought a drawing, charcoal and ink, showing 2 girls standing back to back in a hallway made of mirrors. Zuri recognized the moment instantly. It was them, she and Kendra, but not as fighters, as anchors. After the last speaker stepped down, the auditorium stayed silent for a full 10 seconds. Not out of discomfort, out of reverence. When the applause finally began, it wasn't loud. It was rhythmic, honest. Zuri sat in the front row, hands folded, tears threatening but not falling. She looked over at Kendra, who had her head tilted slightly toward the ceiling, like she was trying to remember every sound, every beat of breath. They didn't speak, even as students filed out. But as they stood, Kendra said, "You see what you started?" Zuri shook her head gently. "We started it." "Nah," Kendra said, a small smile creeping in. "You lit the match. I just fanned the flame." Outside the auditorium, Principal Hayes stood quietly with folded arms. As students passed, he gave Zuri a nod, not one of authority, but of deep, unspoken respect. "That," he said simply, "was the realest thing I've seen in 20 years of education." Zuri just smiled. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to earn the space she stood in. She just was. And that was enough. Tuesday morning arrived with no announcement, no fanfare, no viral clips, just the low hum of a school finally breathing at a slower rhythm. The aftermath of Voices Unscripted had settled across Northgate Academy like quiet rain after a drought. Students weren't just whispering about drama or scandal anymore. They were talking about things that mattered: identity, pressure, fear, silence, belonging. In the hallways, someone had taped handwritten quotes from the open mic session along the lockers. "I stopped hiding my curls after yesterday. Maybe now I can breathe in class without shrinking. We are not your stereotypes. We are your classmates." Zuri stopped to read each one, heart swelling not with pride, but with something more complex. Relief, maybe, or recognition. And yet, beneath the surface, another storm had begun to gather. That afternoon, a teacher from the English department pulled Zuri aside. Her voice was tight. "Just so you're aware," she began, "there are parents asking questions about what happened at the assembly, about who approved the platform yesterday." Zuri's stomach dropped, not in fear, but in disgust. Of course. When marginalized students finally spoke without a script, someone had to feel threatened. "They're saying it's political," the teacher added, her eyes scanning the hallway like danger was hiding in lockers. Zuri nodded once. "It's personal, not political." "I know," the teacher said, "but they don't care about the difference." That evening, Zuri sat at her desk, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts flickering like a reel of half-developed film. For every step forward, there was a weight pulling them back. She didn't cry, she didn't rant, she just sat with it, until her phone buzzed. It was a message from Kendra. "We're getting called to the board. Thursday. No student audience. Just us. You in?" Zuri stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered. Then she typed, "Always." Thursday came fast, too fast. The board meeting was held after school, in a room that smelled like printer ink and policy. Long oak table, 7 adults in business casual, cold expressions, legal terms stacked in binders. Zuri and Kendra sat side by side at the far end. No podium, no microphone, just their voices. One board member leaned forward. This forum you created, Voices Unscripted, was not approved through standard channels. Kendra tilted her head slightly. Neither were the polls calling us names, but they weren't shut down. A pause. Another voice chimed in. Some parents feel the performance promoted division. Zuri's tone stayed calm. It exposed a division that was already there. We didn't create it. We revealed it. An older woman at the end cleared her throat. We have a duty to protect all students, not just the loudest. Zuri inhaled slowly. Then listen to the ones who never had space to speak until now. The room stiffened. Not in defiance, in discomfort. They weren't used to truth spoken without apology. But truth doesn't need permission. After 45 minutes of passive scolding disguised as concern, the meeting ended with no formal punishment, but also no support. This will be reviewed, one man said, already packing his laptop. As Zuri and Kendra walked out, the hallway was dark, empty, but they didn't feel alone. They don't get it, Kendra whispered. They don't have to, Zuri replied, as long as the ones who do keep showing up. That night, Zuri couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because of fire. She got out of bed, pulled out her notebook, and began writing again. Not for school, not for performance, not for the board, for the girls who had watched her from behind their locker doors, for the boys who stopped mocking and started asking questions, for the kids who finally walked down the hall without shrinking. Her words were messy, raw, honest, but they were hers, and they mattered. The next morning, she printed them, cut the sheet into 20 small slips, and taped each one in different parts of the school, on bathroom mirrors, on the edge of bulletin boards, inside empty desks. Each one said, "You don't have to shrink to fit in. Take your space." She didn't sign them. She didn't need to. At lunch, she spotted one taped to the inside of a freshman's binder. At the end of the day, someone had rewritten it in marker on the whiteboard in room 3B. Mrs. Whitley didn't erase it. No one did. That afternoon, Kendra found her in the library. "We're not done, are we?" she asked. Zuri smiled, soft but certain. "We're just getting started." The following week unfolded like a quiet revolution, not loud or headline-worthy, but unmistakably real. The bulletin boards in Northgate Academy, once filled with science fair sign-ups and SAT prep flyers, were now covered with handwritten notes, sketches, and affirmations. Some were anonymous, others proudly signed. One read, "I stopped straightening my hair because I saw Zuri walk in with hers free." Another simply said, "To Kendra, I never knew I could speak until I heard you." There was no official memo, no administrator approval, yet the school's walls themselves had become canvases of unfiltered truth. Even Mrs. Whitley had hung a small sign near her desk that said, "Your silence is not required here." Zuri moved through these halls with the quiet strength of someone who no longer questioned her place in them. But it was in the library, her usual safe haven, where the next tremor began. She'd been helping a sophomore, Z, prep for an English presentation when the assistant principal entered with a clipboard and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Miss Bennett, could I see you for a moment?" Zuri exchanged a glance with Z, then followed him into a side room where Kendra was already seated, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "We've been contacted by the district," the assistant principal began, folding his hands. "They're concerned." Zuri didn't move. "About what?" "About the shift in tone, the messages being left around campus. The perception that this school is becoming a battleground of identity." Kendra laughed, once sharp. "You mean they're mad we stopped hiding?" He ignored the tone. "The board has suggested we contain further expression until it can be reviewed." "Reviewed?" Zuri repeated, voice calm. "Do they want to screen what we feel now too?" The assistant principal shifted uncomfortably. "This is just a pause, to ensure equity." That word, weaponized so gently, nearly made her choke. "This is equity," Kendra said coldly. "Kids finally seeing themselves on a wall, in a hallway, in a sentence. You're asking us to undo it all for their comfort." He stood. "We're not asking you to undo anything, just to wait." Zuri stood too. "We've waited our whole lives." They left before he could respond. Outside, in the fading hallway light, Kendra leaned her back against the wall, fists clenched. They want us invisible again. Zuri shook her head. No, they want us polite. So what now? Kendra asked. Zuri didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the corkboard nearest the cafeteria, where someone had pinned a drawing of two faceless figures, both holding a megaphone, both chained at the ankles. We don't fight the noise this time, she said. We fight the silence they're trying to bring back. That night, Zuri wrote a new letter. Not a speech, not a poem, a manifesto. 1 page, titled, "This is not a phase." In it she wrote, "We are not a wave that will pass. We are the tide that rewrites the shape of the shore. This is not a trend. This is transformation. You can erase the ink, but we'll carve it into the walls. We're not waiting anymore." She didn't sign it. But the next morning, someone else did. Then another, then another. By 4th period, the letter had been copied and posted to nearly every hallway. 17 different students claimed a pen at the bottom, scribbling their names with fire in their veins. Kendra signed hers in red, Z in purple, Mia in blue. And then, halfway through the day, Zuri saw it. A quiet freshman she didn't know, walking down the hall with the letter printed on the back of her hoodie in permanent ink. It was spreading because truth spreads faster when it's finally spoken, but not everyone celebrated. In the staff lounge, whispers started again. Some teachers rolled their eyes. A parent email leaked that called the movement emotional terrorism dressed as empowerment. And on Friday, another meeting was scheduled. No students invited, no agenda shared, just District Review of Cultural Disruption. Zuri found the flyer posted on the staff bulletin board next to a flyer for prom. The irony wasn't lost on her. She stared at it for a moment, then pulled out her phone and took a photo. She didn't post it. Not yet. Instead, she walked to the courtyard where Kendra sat on the low stone wall, headphones half on, notebook open on her lap. "They're doubling down," Zuri said, showing her the photo. Kendra read the headline, shook her head. "Let them meet. We'll move." "How?" Zuri asked. "They hold the building." "Yeah," Kendra said, smiling faintly. "But we hold the soul." Monday morning didn't feel like an ending, but like the beginning of something no one could quite name yet. The sky over Northgate Academy was clear for the first time in days, a deep cobalt blue that made the bricks of the school building look sharper, more solid, as if daring someone to question the ground they stood on. Zuri walked in without her bomber jacket, her curls tied back, her posture tall, unshaken. In her bag, she carried nothing unusual, just a notebook, a pen, and the original copy of This Is Not a Phase, now laminated, the edges worn slightly from being passed from hand to hand. Kendra met her at the top of the stairs, her braids pulled high into a single, unapologetic crown. She wore a white hoodie with 5 words hand-painted in bold black across the back. "We wrote our own space." No one spoke as they entered the building, but everyone watched, not with caution, not with judgment, but with something closer to awe. Even the students who once laughed behind screens now stepped aside, as if instinctively knowing that something bigger than gossip had rooted itself into the very bones of this school. By 3rd period, word had spread. The district had canceled the closed-door staff meeting after parents, alumni, and even faculty demanded transparency. The email read, "We encourage a school-wide forum to listen and understand all voices impacted." A forum, not a punishment, a response, a shift. And in that shift, Zuri saw it clearly. They had broken through. Not with rage, not with perfection, but with relentless truth. At lunch, they didn't sit at the back table. They walked directly into the center of the courtyard, where a circle of benches was already forming. No microphone, no schedule, just space. One by one, students joined them. First Z, then Mia, then Andre, still quiet but wearing a shirt that said, "Your silence will not protect you." By the time the bell rang, over 50 students had gathered, not chanting, not yelling, just being, owning space with breath and presence. Mrs. Whitley stood at the edge, tears in her eyes. Even Principal Hayes, arms folded at a respectful distance, nodded once and said nothing. Because sometimes, silence, when laced with respect, is louder than applause. That afternoon, Zuri found a single note folded and taped inside her locker. No name, just a sentence. "Because of you, I applied to speak at graduation." She smiled, soft, full, complete. It wasn't about being celebrated anymore. It was about opening the door so wide that no one could close it again. She walked to room 3B after the final bell, not for class, but because that space, once a cage, had become a monument. On the board, someone had written in neat, even handwriting. They told us we were too much. We became more. She took a picture. Not for proof, but for memory. Because memory, once witnessed, becomes legacy. That evening, Zuri and Kendra sat on the rooftop of the community center in Eastlake, watching the sun melt into the horizon. Their shoulders nearly touched, their sneakers swinging over the ledge. "You think it'll last?" Kendra asked. Zuri didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched the sky fade from fire to indigo. "It doesn't have to last unchanged," she finally said. "It just has to keep moving." "We moved it," Kendra whispered. "We are it," Zuri replied. Below them, the gym lights flickered on, the sound of gloves hitting canvas rising through the air like a rhythm, steady and strong. Tomorrow would bring more challenges. There would always be those who preferred silence, preferred sameness, preferred control. But now, every student who felt invisible knew they weren't alone. Every hallway carried their words. Every wall bore their defiance. Every classroom had been cracked open just wide enough for truth to slip in. And once truth enters, it doesn't leave quietly. As darkness settled and the city lights began to hum, Zuri closed her notebook one final time. Not because the story was over, but because this chapter had found its breath, its voice, its fight, and its freedom. They tried to silence her. They tried to pit her against another. They tried to turn her strength into a spectacle. But, in the end, Zuri didn't just stand her ground. She built new ground for others to stand on too. And Kendra? She stood beside her, not behind her. Together they lit a fire no one could put out, because when one voice rises, others follow. When one girl says enough, it echoes through walls built to keep her quiet. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of 1,000 more. If this moved you, like, comment, and subscribe. And don't just watch, listen, learn, stand up. Someone out there is waiting for a story like this to know they're not alone. Let's make sure they hear it.